So we were just seeing this article in, was it Forbes magazine, I think, about psychedelics, the ongoing medical research on psychedelics that is funded by DARPA, this particular research program that's looking for basically chemical compounds that could produce the effect of healing PTSD or depression without producing the psychedelic experience. Tripping without tripping, in other words. And yeah, again, funded by DARPA, the Defense Department, basically. And so it raises the question of it raises a lot of questions, but more generally speaking, it's the place of psychedelics in our culture today.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, maybe this attempt will be sort of like the kind of revolution in the new sciences, the quantum physics and the observer effect. Maybe there will be this application that they try to realize, and they're like, oh, actually, we're not just physiology.
Well,
that there's this experiential component that is necessary, and so it kind of suggests something ontological,
right?
Yeah,
because there is an implicit ontology at work in this sort of research.
It's materialism,
right? And the most prevalent way of sort of explaining the materialistic account of consciousness is using computational metaphors, where whatever our consciousness is, it's kind of like the operating system that's projected onto a screen.
Yeah.
And it's pixelated, it has a finite resolution, but most of the actual cognitive work that's going on is, it's unconscious because it's just in the processing of the hardware.
Yeah.
That's the coding behind the operating system that most of us have no idea how to use, or we don't interact with it.
Yep.
So we only interact with the screen. That's our consciousness. And when pharmacologists look for treatments for whatever mental disorder, they're really just looking to, in some way, augment the brain.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what the person thinks is going on or what the person says is affecting them.
They're like tinkering with the machine.
Yeah, they want to switch out the hardware and give you some new chemistry to change what gets projected on the screen. But ultimately, the ontology here is that our conscious existence, our lives, are nothing but
outsides,
physiochemical processes. Yeah. And so DARPA wants to be able to heal its soldiers from the traumas of war so that it can send them back out to war.
Yeah, I liked the way that you characterized it. What was it? I can't remember your tweet.
Well, instead of researching, I don't know if researching is the right word, but how do we bring about a more peaceful, way of life and draw down the war machine of the Defense Department and Pentagon? Instead of that, we're funding science to produce a cure for the trauma caused by the war. It's what a twisted set of motivations there. It's I think we're looking in the wrong place for the solution to the real problem.
Yeah, it's like an addiction.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not clear to me that...
Or, it's also, it's... What it is a paradigm that's refusing to let any contradictory information in.
Right.
But that can only go on for so long.
Do you think that when you do have a classical psychedelic experience, and there's diversity in that, but when you eat mushrooms or you drop acid or you smoke DMT, is there an experience that's produced reliably that leads one to question the habits of our society and the values of the modern world, or do you think that depends totally on the set that the person taking the substance brings into the experience?
I would say that I think this is related to what we were talking about with Desmond and the idiotics and overdetermination. Like something that is determining, forming things, but it's also exceeds them. So there's already like a kind of superstructure being provided through this creativity that, you know, precedes and exceeds determination, like determinate thoughts, you know, coherency and perception. And so I think that, yes, I think it does, regardless of like how primed a person is, like how set a person is to consider psychedelics as like providing some experiential experience that then critiques the way that society is organized.
Yeah.
I think it's that it, and I think it's because it connects us with that chthonic kind of, and I mean in that like overdetermined way, like I think there's something like, I guess, really moral about
it. Breaks the immanent frame, would you say? The psychedelic experience.
What do you mean by that?
It forces you out of your closed, contained sense of what is true and real by revealing a larger, encompassing mystery that is just undeniable. I mean, you know, that's what the studies at Johns Hopkins and UCLA and other places on like mystical experience occasioned by taking psilocybin mushrooms, for example, like they're finding that reliably 70% of people have life-changing mystical encounters with the divine, ineffable ground of being, and are, you know, it's now empirically established, right? And
but you know, and that psychedelics are also connected with other means of doing that, you know. So the question should really be about consciousness,
right,
and not like as an epiphenomenon,
right? And so there's so many different approaches to the psychedelic research that's underway. I mean, there's the corporate attempt to medicalize it, bring it into the pharmaceutical model where you're prescribing pills, and, you know, it's in that sense not just about healing people, it's about creating a revenue stream for shareholders. So but then there's also this whole underground movement of psychedelic healers, and then there's this, I mean, it's kind of liminal and overlaps a little bit, but there are, you know, lineage holders, indigenous people from North and South America who are, you know, sharing peyote ceremony and ayahuasca ceremony and trying to really bring these ancient traditions of medicine circles to the white people intentionally, to be like, okay, you need this. And so all this is happening, and it's unclear which direction the hospital or the church, in a way, I mean, just the sacred or the scientific, as it were, but science in the context of capitalism. And it's unclear whether it's just going to be all of it advancing and changing things in different ways, or if one approach or the other is going to sort of win out, and then the state's going to decide to pick winners and losers and say, you can't do that, we have to do it this way. But it's all unfolding really quickly.
It is.
I never would have thought that psychedelics would come roaring into the mainstream conversation.
I mean, I was also, you know, I'm going to get a little, I guess, in the weeds a bit astrologically, but just thinking about how, you know, Michael Pollan wrote that trip treatment, and was it the New Yorker?
Yeah.
In the New Yorker? That was in like 2015 or 16.
I read that article and cried my eyes out.
I was like elated, and I think that really, it captures the Uranus-Pluto like feeling, and that was when they were pretty exact. And if you think about the last time they made that hard aspect to each other, it was in the 60s.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. And now we're entering this, like we passed Saturn, Pluto, and there's Uranus, Saturn tensions now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like the kind of conservative unwillingness to change.
Well, the attempt to institutionalize
exactly
ineffability and wild, unpredictable nature of the experiences that are elicited by these substances. Unpredictable in the sense that each individual there is an extent to which the psychological baggage that each of us carries around with us is amplified in a non-specific way, as Stan Groff puts it. And so it's unpredictable in the sense that you need a proper container and context for the experiences that erupt.
Yeah. Yes.
And part of that is the worldview question, or the cosmology question. Like, how do you integrate, if you're the average sort of, worker, consumer, late capitalist denizen of a Western oligarchy, and you have an experience like this, and then you have to come back into the world and your job and your family and all the ways that you're plugged into a system that you've seen is absurd.
Yeah.
Now, that can be crazy making.
Yeah.
And so, that's why these pharmaceutical companies are being paid by DARPA to try to get the healing benefit without the psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
Because it does have cultural
that's disruptive.
effects. Yeah. It's disruptive. It disturbs the zombie sleepwalk into industrial apocalypse.
Yeah.
It forces you to call things into question that are essential to the furthering of this machine that we're all embedded in.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it puts you into deep remembrance of things, of all the things that are basically held back.
It does. It's literally a remembering, in the sense that you recognize your embeddedness in a larger body.
Yeah.
And the boundary between your human body and the other bodies of which you are a part becomes relativized, and that can be really scary.
Yeah, especially if you've been living in a way that's very opposite to that realization. Then you feel guilt, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's related to, this idea of sin. It's like waking up in sin.
Yeah. And yet these substances seem to have the potential to be quite healing. They stir up a lot.
Yeah.
And it's rips the scab off, and then you're raw and exposed, and that can be dangerous,
Yeah.
But it could also be an opportunity to actually heal and not just have a scab that's partially healed, or just temporarily bandaged or something.
Yes.
I guess in some ways it's about the confrontation with death, which, when your body boundary becomes relativized and you begin to experience the sense in which you're already dead, in a way, if that makes sense. You can feel the temporary nature of your being, of your body as an organism, and you can feel the way that it's linked into this whole community of life through what you eat, what you breathe, and just the porosity of your skin, and you just see how fragile it is, and that seems to be all.
I think that's why they can be very healing for people who have addictions. Is that you feel I've done all this to myself, and I'm so precious. My body's so precious. I don't want to do that anymore.
Right. Yeah, and it shows you in a vivid way what's possible, and you're not so stuck in the repetition of the same that's got you in the rut of addiction.
I think it allows for a kind of transcendent remove in order to be able to see the content of experience without being identified with it.
Yeah.
You know, because in my experience, I've felt in certain psychedelic experiences that I was, I guess I understood myself or remembered myself as a divine, eternal being.
Yeah.
And like, had this, I guess, this fullness of possibility I could see, and the highest aspiration for my eventual, like, I guess, re-entrance into the world and relationships with people in my life, like my family. I'm like, I'm gonna make this really good, and it's like you're like, yeah, there's this kind of transcendent remove that shows what could be possible and good.
Yeah. But I guess
it all kind of contracts back when you...
Yeah, so I mean, I know you have critiques too of psychedelic culture and the way that sometimes it can be put forward as a panacea or a miracle cure for all of society's ills, or at least there's no recognition of the dangers and the risks involved. And
yeah,
I mean, so what do you think is important to keep in mind when engaging? Like, what are you worried about, let's say, aside from the role of corporate capitalism?
With psychedelics?
Yeah.
What do you...
Well, at a cultural level, like, in terms of engaging spirituality through the pathway of psychedelics.
One of the things that kind of bothers me is the way people talk about it when, in the same language as, like, biohacking or, like, hacking yourself. And, when it's... Because then, to me, that feels like it's almost being appropriated. It's like the same kind of capitalist logic, I guess, but applied to oneself, you know, as if we were just machines that we need to continue to get upgrades for and learn new ways of hacking. And so then it gets, like, LSD and things like that. They get placed into a context where there's not the same kind of reverence that I think is, like, probably the most important aspect of what those substances can open. Because that's when, it can be traumatizing. And so I'll let you flow from there. I can keep flowing about it.
Yeah. Well, Michael Pollan has this phrase I really like from his book, How to Change Your Mind, the betterment of well people.
Yeah.
And I think, there's this whole kick in I guess, maybe it began with Romanticism, but it's really taken off now, of, like, self-improvement and life is a journey of self-discovery, and clearly in that sort of romantic context of it's the hero's journey, but now it's not just the gods, it's every individual gets to go on it. And it's like psychedelics obviously feed this myth. And I one of my worries about psychedelics would just be the way that they get ceremonialized and ritualized. I think the medical model tends to emphasize the individual.
Yeah.
And I think the indigenous context around these medicines is ceremonial and communal, and it's always done in community, and there's a sharing of what each person went through afterwards, and you're all in it together the whole time, singing together or dancing even. And so that to me seems like, not that there can't also be solo journeys, there's a place for that, but if that's the main emphasized, like, thing, I worry that it only further alienates us, and that we really need to find ways to weave these powerful catalysts into our collective life, and find ways to, engage in these otherwise radically it's hard to bring the experiences into culture in the sense that they're excessive, in the sense that they're...
See, yeah. And there's, I think, another issue is that I think, some have said things like that certain substances, they provide us with a kind of, access to the supersensible, through like maybe not totally material organs of perception that we have that are dormant. Different, subtle body sort of something's going on. So they engage these capacities, but the substance is basically like an activity that we bring in that works through that organ, if that makes sense. And so for example, Lisa Romero has talked about the importance of at this, she didn't necessarily say this, but I think that there needs to be, at the same time that there's like sacrament, psychedelic sacrament culture, ceremonial stuff, that there should also be individual like inner work that like brings thinking alive and free in a freely willed way.
So psychedelics complement a more robust spiritual
they can,
set of exercises.
Potentially. I don't know. I haven't done that myself, so I can't say that it's true. But
I guess from the anthroposophical perspective, it seems, my sense is the general worry is that the will is not being cultivated as much. And the thinking function, perhaps, maybe a little bit more, but it's mostly feeling, right? It's like these...
Yes, exactly.
You go on this journey
it's kind of
geometrical,
like
jeweled,
self-contained
multidimensionality. And so...
Self-feeling. That's what Kulevind would say.
I think there's some of that, but there's also other feeling.
Totally, I agree. I think there is, for those who have experienced psychedelics, and have like awakenings and things like that, obviously there's something that's entering that's not just the self, I think. Not just oneself. But I guess the concern is not so much, I think, with the substances as with like the state of like souls who have been conditioned by materialist mainstream culture. And just how already people have little control over their wills because of the technology that's been created to exploit, and advertising and whatever else.
Right. And so the idea is spirituality, the spiritual mystical experience would be debased in some sense by coming in the form of like shrink wrapped
or
mushrooms.
Distorted, you know.
It's like again, I think that's the individual side of it, where it becomes a consumer good, so I can have my experience rather than a communally embedded ceremonial practice that's sort of set outside of the economic context of capitalism.
Well, and it's potentially antithetical to it. I think those experiences are very bonding.
Right. I mean, it's just striking me now that this is an example of one of the ways in which we can begin to create spaces outside of the context of the capitalist economy, where even if there's money involved to make the situation possible, like to maintain the structure where the community meets to do the ceremony or whatever, and to get food for the morning and taking care of people, basically, we all contribute a little bit. So there's money exchange, but it's not a transaction. It's a self-sustaining, cooperative.
It's like an organism.
Mutual aid, organism. And as long as capitalism remains our dominant political economy, we're going to need money to get food and shelter. So, but to start building these ties, social ties and practices that aren't in any obvious way like feeding the capitalist system, and just they're not the whole idea of like a corporation that's going to that's going to provide psychedelics as a source of healing for people. It's like, you can't do that if you're a for-profit corporation. I'm sorry. Not because you're bad people, but because the system is not set up to serve that end.
Well,
human flourishing has never been the goal of capitalism.
This is really interesting, because so we're talking about psychedelics, but we've also talked about how, for example, the CIA has appropriated identity politics to basically be appealing now, and capitalism is trying to, or at least psychedelics are being assimilated into a capitalist framework, and these are both, I think, there's like the common element of that sort of Uranus Pluto, liberation, individuality, like awakening, and now it's just interesting to just considering like the phenomena that are unfolding right now, that those two things are coming into this phase of like mutation and potentially being co-opted for those who are in power. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, and like, I guess debased because they're being made what they're not. Maybe that's hyperbolic. I don't know. Not all of it.
No, not at all.
Human beings are
complex.
The CIA, so I'm not like condemning everyone involved.
Yeah, I mean, I see the parallel you're drawing, but I also would see a connection to the CIA program in the 50s, MK Ultra.
Oh, yeah.
That was using LSD in search of a truth serum.
Yeah.
And people were dosed without their knowledge, and
that's not really talked about. That sounds like horrific.
Well, that's what the business of the CIA is, to be horrific, basically.
Yeah.
But so there's clearly a sense in which, and the role of, if you've seen the series Mad Men, I don't think you have, actually, have you?
No, I don't think so.
The role of acid in the advertising industry was sort of touched on in that series, which is kind of a historical
I think I've seen one
expose.
Episode. He's like a businessman. They go to Esalen, right?
Well, yeah, the last episode finishes at Esalen. But there's a connection between the way that LSD and the psychedelic experience was hijacked from the very beginning by the military-industrial complex and by capitalism and advertising.
How long after Albert Hoffman discovered LSD did that happen?
Oh, within a decade. I mean,
yeah.
I think it was discovered in 1943.
Okay.
And,
it's bizarre to me that they thought they could use that. I mean, I don't know if they achieved any success, but I just feel so bad for the people who are involved in that.
Yeah.
That's gotta be traumatizing. Who knows, though, what all their experiences were like. Maybe somebody had an experience that was life-changing despite how terrible the circumstances were.
I think without knowing that you've been dosed,
you're just gonna think you're going
crazy.
Yeah. I wonder what. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna ask about Albert Hoffman's experience.
Bicycle
Day.
I think it was I don't remember if it was his first or second experience. His first was unintentional. But in the first or second experience, he was like laying on the couch and like, really having this intense experience. And his neighbor came over with some milk, and he saw her as some sort of a witch that was trying to poison him. And,
oh my God.
And so it's not that his whole trip, the first or second trip, was horrible. Part of it was deep and profound and eye-opening, to say the least. But that often is the case in a 12-hour LSD session. That sometimes you're in hell, sometimes you're in heaven, sometimes you're not sure where you are. But it tends to run the full spectrum.
It is a crazy, crazy drug.
Yeah, a lot of untapped potential across all the domains of human experience, artistic, scientific, religious. I mean, I see LSD as the kind of first chemical revelation in a way that's like sort of unique to
modernity,
the modern West.
I do too, yeah.
And it's definitely in a different, I mean, we say they're all the psychedelics and the psychedelic experience, but LSD is very different from psilocybin mushrooms.
Yeah.
It's very different from...
Oh, God, it's so different.
Ayahuasca.
I think it's more Uranian.
Yeah.
It's
it is.
like lightning, electricity.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
So there's a lot of, I think, interesting philosophical research and philosophical relevance to the psychedelic, experience. A lot of research to be done about the philosophical implications, and William James was one of the first to point to this.
Yeah.
In the study of consciousness, the capacity to alter it, and in some ways expand it, helps us to, avoid foreclosing our conception of the nature of things. And certainly, I think, if you've had such an experience, you're probably, I would say, less likely to rush to some kind of a dismissive explanation of consciousness as an epiphenomenon.
Yeah.
Because you just see the same world that was always there in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's reliably like this, as just so many times when a trip is first starting, I'm like, this is so obvious, and it's always right under our noses, and we just neglect it, ignore it. And it's just this feeling of like, this is so easy to be in the world in this way, and why can't we all just remember it all the time? And so there's a problem there. Like, why? I don't know the answer to that. but you're changed, at least to some degree, after you've had that experience.
Yeah.
I think it does afford a lure. Even when you're back in your normal habits, you're lured by this possibility in a way that you weren't before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. It that there's more.
Mm-hmm.
There's more than what meets the eye.
Mm-hmm.